Well, I'm not exactly right out the gate getting to this one, but I've now seen The Eternals. So let's talk about it. So I really didn't know what to expect about this one. I know that critically it's, I think, the lowest reviewed Marvel movie ever. And audiences seem kind of divided on it as well. And having seen it, I do get why. But if you're here for my actual opinion, which I should hope so, otherwise, what are you doing here? Then I enjoyed it. I thought it was quite good. It's unusual in a way that I can definitely see is off-putting to a lot of people. Much in the same way that, like, I understand why Blade Runner 2049 didn't do particularly well at the box office, though that one did pretty well with critics, at least. So, The Eternals is a strange movie if you don't know anything about Jack Kirby, the guy who originally created these characters and these storylines. Because if you know anything about the work of Jack Kirby, then this is very Jack Kirby. I don't necessarily mean like in the granular details of the characters, but I mean in the tone and the themes and the concepts and the fact that we are dealing with these larger than life characters, these godlike figures whose emotional spectrum is treated in the broadest possible sense. Very few people have nuance. Whatever nuance is here is brought by the actors, not by the characters in terms of how they are designed. Everything's a little bit distant, a little bit alien, and a little bit head trippy in terms of the way it's presented. I personally don't think inaccessibly so, but I can see where that would turn some people off. But all of this is very Jack Kirby. The man loved his weird nonsense space stuff. He loved millennia-old characters dealing with eon-long plots, grudges, conspiracies, struggles between families. That was his bread and butter. And that's very much what this is. And it results in a film that, in a lot of ways, feels more like a truncated miniseries. The thing's 2.5 hours long, and it's an hour and a half into the movie before the full team is even assembled. I think it might even be longer than that. So this thing is weirdly paced. The way in which information is given is not entirely linear. We get flashbacks that aren't motivated in the same way that flashbacks would normally be motivated by a narrative. They just kind of happen at various points. But that's just kind of the way this thing's rolling. And it does feel like some things could definitely have been delved into a lot more than they were. Take, for example, the relationship between Gilgamesh and Thena. The two of them have a very complicated relationship that we catch glimpses of and get an overview on, but you can't help but feel that there was a lot more meat on that bone, like probably enough for its own movie. And that's kind of the thing. It feels like a lot of these characters, or pairs of these characters in some cases, really could have supported their own film, and yet they're all crammed into this one, which is both a good and a bad thing, because it makes the whole thing feel all the stranger, which, if you're going to do Jack Kirby, it should feel kind of strange, both in terms of the story it's telling and the way it's presented. But on top of that, it does make it feel like we don't get to know any of these characters especially well, which I think is something that audiences, particularly Marvel audiences, have really gotten used to. Marvel made the decision way back when they did Iron Man. We are front and center focusing on these heroes. We want to make the audience love these heroes. I'm not sure that Eternals cares if you love these characters or not. I think it hopes you find them interesting, but I don't think it really cares if you love them the way Iron Man cared about you loving Tony Stark, the way Spider-Man Homecoming cared that you love Peter Parker, etc., etc., etc. Marvel has always really been about selling the characters as likable, lovable, people you want to see more of and hang out with. And the Eternals just, I can't say that it fails at that, because it's just not doing it at all. And again, based off what Marvel's done up to this point, I can see where the where the failure to do that, I say failure, the lack of inclusion of that would be off-putting for some people. It feels like a superhero franchise made by a studio other than Marvel. There are moments and aspects and elements that do feel Marvel, mostly the comedic leaning stuff, but the overall structure and the characters and just the way it feels like, well, honestly, it feels a little bit more like something like Man of Steel, where it's just presenting you with these godlike figures and doesn't really seem to be doing the legwork to get you to care. Now, that having been said, I do like this more than Man of Steel. I think partially because the ideas are bigger and grander, and there's way more of these characters. So I feel like not asking me to commit to liking any particular one deeply is a little bit more acceptable. Whereas with Superman, if I don't connect and particularly like your Superman and your Superman movie, I feel like that's a bit more of a ding, because Superman is supposed to be likable and lovable and relatable. And the Eternals aren't. They're not in the movie, and they aren't in the comics so well as I understand them. I haven't read Eternals comics. I do have to cop to that. But I've read Jack Kirby, and Jack Kirby, he is off on his own thing. He doesn't really care if you like his characters that much or not. So it does look very nice. It's a very pretty movie. I like the design of a lot of the things that we have in this. The performances are, for the most part, quite good. There are some things that don't quite work for me. Kamal Nanjiani, I probably butchered that. Apologies. He's like, I got his shtick very early on, and he leans on it a little more heavily than I would care to. That said, there are still some very good comedic moments that come out of that. There's just some flat comedic moments in between the bits that work. The villains are a little bit of a mixed bag, and I did say villains plural because there's kind of multiple layers going on with that. But you know what? I'm going to have to save that for spoiler territory to really delve into that. And the performances, like I said, they're good, but they are slightly distanced. But again, I think that's intentional. I do think this is very much the movie that the people involved wanted to make. And it's mostly a question of whether that lands with folks or not. And I get why it didn't, but no, I kind of get this. I'm able to tune into its wavelength, which I'm honestly often not with Kirby. I think, honestly, bringing it to live action and just, while the characters are not innately going out of their way to be likable and the story doesn't really seem to care, the actors bring enough personality to them in a way that a lot of Kirby's characters don't feel like they have a particularly nuanced or deep personality. The actors bring just enough that I'm able to gel with this a bit more than I can with Kirby on the page, where it's static images and I have to decide for myself what they sound like. And given the way that a lot of his characters are, they tend to sound very stuffy in my head. And that's less so here, just by casting people who were able to channel these lines into something that worked. Nobody was really a standout. This is not an acting showpiece by any case. I probably liked Faustus and Gilgamesh the best as far as characters go, but they were sort of the closest to lovable that these characters were. I am going to start to get into spoilers now, because I talking about the villains is about the one thing where I'm going to give what I consider some genuine criticisms about the thing that aren't just, well, you're either going to gel with it or you're not, which is my feeling on the movie as a whole. I enjoyed it. I get why other people don't. So now we're doing spoilers. So couple things to talk about with the villainous forces at play. First, let's deal with the deviants. I like the design on the deviants. I like how sinewy they look. I thought that was a really cool choice. I lost almost all interest in the head deviant the instant he got a human face. It was a great monster. And I was on board and following the idea of this monster getting stronger, and I think they could even have propelled the idea of the monster getting smarter. But giving it a human face and a voice, suddenly I didn't care anymore. I actually really liked the monster. And especially like the confrontations at the end when he's facing down Thena and he's talking to her with Gilgamesh's voice. You know what I thought of and what it made me wish it was? If you've ever seen the movie Annihilation, it's a great movie. Freaking weird. And it's also a movie I wasn't sure if I liked for several days after I saw it, but I love it. There's one part that is unsettling as hell, and it involves a bear. Now, the bear is this sort of misshapen half-skull looking thing in the first place. And when it opens its mouth, it doesn't roar, it screams. With a woman's scream, screaming for help. And it is one of the most unsettling things I have ever seen put on a screen. And I could not help but think, how much cooler and off-putting would it be if this thing still looked like a monster but was opening its mouth and Gilgamesh's voice was just coming out? I mean, like I said, the instant he got a human face, I just didn't care. Which was a shame, because I thought they sold the monster really well prior to that. Well, so that's the Deviants. Icarus. It's fine. Problem is, I called it almost immediately. And I'm not trying to say this as a flex. And I don't know if this is a common complaint, but the instant they found Ajax's body, he immediately says, a deviant killed her. And I'm sitting in the theater thinking to myself, you said that real fast and really declaratively, like you're invested in the idea that that's what everyone thinks. You've done no investigating. You didn't come and see the creature, but you're going to show up and immediately go, deviant killed her. That's sus, dude. And so I didn't necessarily immediately say you're definitely the bad guy, but I did immediately think if you turn out to be the villain, I will not be surprised at all. And hey, look at that. He was. Thankfully, I don't think the movie's structured in a way that it is actually leaning too heavily on that being a big surprise twist. It's leaning on a little, but not too much. So that didn't break it the way it might have otherwise. The Celestials themselves, well, a couple things about the Celestials. First of all, this thing communicates the scale and size of these things really well. When those freaking fingers came up out of the water and more than enveloped this island and this volcano, I'm like, wow. It's actually really hard to relay that kind of scale in a movie and do it well and have it feel big and not just look fake. It looked huge. That was impressive. Because there is a difference between making something simply big and making it feel big. So that did that very well. The other thing is, it was interesting to me that they had the reveal of what the Celestials' plan was about halfway through the movie. Actually, before they'd even finished assembling the team. So a little more than an hour in, we find out what the plan was. And we realize pretty soon after the Eternals are going to have to stop it. That was interesting putting that there. And I think played into the overall feel, which is that this isn't a twist. This is the kind of stuff that goes on with these cosmic style beings. This is the kinds of stories you tell with them. So that's where we're going. We're going to do this here so that we can watch the characters truly try and grapple with this. As much as these slightly distancing character portrayals are going to allow us to do. So I thought that was pretty well done as well. But yeah, I called Icarus way too early, and I was really digging the Deviants until, they humanized them, which was Bad idea. The very end is also, like, I've tried checking on this. Right now, there's no real confirmation for continuation. There's been talk from the writers that they would like to do a prequel series, which is weird because not only both post-credit scenes, but the ending proper, even before credits, all set up stuff for later. And at the very end, it even says the Eternals will return. And I don't think they've confirmed that there's going to be a second movie. That, I think what we're seeing is Marvel got cocky, which they haven't really done in ways this noticeable before. I guess the cockiest you could say they got up to this was giving Endgame an over 3-hour runtime. That was cocky. But this is the kind of cocky where if it doesn't work out, well, you know what? It's going to feel like back when Warner Brothers first announced all the DC movies they were going to make on a 5-year plan, and most of them did not happen within that time frame, and most of them probably will never happen at all. So it's that was weird. The one that threw me off the most was the one like at the end of the movie, proper even before the credits. Like they have Cersei get hauled away, and I'm like, what? And also the other elementals, Eternals that were there. And then we had the mid-credits, which introduced Star Fox and Pip the Troll, which was kind of amusing, but I'm also like, okay. And then at the very end, hinting at Black Knight, and I had to look up the voice that was heard there. That was Mahershala Ali, so hinting at Blade. Now that one will probably still happen. Is that where they plan to put Black Knight showing up? That's a interesting pairing. I don't know how to feel about the end credits because it feels like the cockiest moves when maybe they shouldn't have been that certain about what was going to come next that Marvel's done in some time, if not ever. But overall, I did enjoy the movie. Eternals. You seen it? What'd you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Like, share, subscribe. I got a Patreon. That's how I pay my bills, keep this whole operation up and running, and I'm able to go to the movies at 3 o'clock on a weekday when I am literally the only person in the theater. Benefits of a small town. So any amount you're able to help there is of great appreciation. It helps. Like I'm losing words. Whatever. You know what I'm talking about. Like, share, subscribe also help me out, but don't sweat it. I can't articulate it properly for starters. But second of all, I'm not going to put that much pressure on you, so just come on back next time you need a break. Hey, if you're sticking around through the credits, might as well hear some names read out. My Patreon helps support this, and in particular, I want to thank Raven McBain, Bookworm, MJ, Tracy Scrabbit, Vincent Paul Bartolucci, Kaylin Schwartz, Edalyn, Robin Moore, Ross Schultz, Shayla Gourlay. Want to hear me mispronounce your name? Check out the rewards on the Patreon.